Why does God allow evil? Why? Welcome to the But I Dunno Podcast, the podcast where we discuss important questions and things about the Bible, about culture, about society. And we have no answers for you, which is especially true for today's episode. My name is John.
My name is JP.
And it's great to have you here with us.
Wonderful. Virtually
with us.
Yes.
So we want to remind you that we are on the social networks, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. Some of you are watching on YouTube. It's great to have you here. It's fantastic. And we have a website, www.dunnocast.co.za. That's www.dunnocast.co.za. I'm getting pretty good at that.
Getting faster and faster. Everything goes on.
Batteries not included. So, here at the But I Dunno Podcast, we pride ourselves in not having answers to questions.
Yes.
We pride ourselves in the fact that we are probably wrong about everything we ever talk about. If you don't understand what we're saying right now, you need to go listen to our first 3 episodes, episode 1, 2, and 3. They give a little bit of context as to why we feel we can do this podcast, talking about a bunch of things, and yet not knowing anything. It's cool. It's a cool podcast in that way. So today's episode, titled Why Does God Allow Evil, is an age-old question, an accusation thrown towards Christianity year in, year out, throughout the generations. Every generation has a new proponent for this question, a new angle to the question, a new question to the question. And we here on the But I Dunno Podcast today are going to give you the final opinion.
We have the answer.
Opinion.
We have the ability to talk about our thoughts.
So if you came here hoping to get like the definitive answer to this question, we want to encourage you to listen till the end of this episode so that you can get one step closer to that definitive answer.
You've got high hopes.
I mean, I'm just suggesting they're going to get one step. They're not going to get the definitive answer, but they're going to get one step closer to it.
Yes, might take 2 steps back during, and then it's.
And so just to give a bit of context, like, for the whole, we say go listen to the first 3 episodes. We definitely are Christians, and we definitely believe in a loving God who sent Jesus Christ to die on the cross for our sins. And you'll get that picture if you've listened to our podcast for longer than 3.5 minutes. But at the same time, like, we want to be open about the things we don't know, and we want to be able to be in relationship with those things, if I can put it that way. We find that far too often when people don't know things, they are afraid of them. And I think that's kind of one of the things that we really want to say in an episode like today's episode. Not all our episodes are particularly like this, but today's episode is like, we're not afraid of this. We're not scared of the fact that there's this question that's difficult and people have been trying to answer it for a long time, and there's always somebody who's dissatisfied with the answer. We're not afraid of that. We want to be able to talk about it. We want to be able to put our opinions out there and contribute to the conversation at the end of the day.
Yeah. I think the one thing that happens a lot in the Christian world is if you hear about someone who's deconstructed their faith in the deconstruction movement, one of the things that they say is, well, nobody really talked about the real issues like pain and suffering. Yeah. And that's simply like that's not what we're about. We want to talk about these things. We want to acknowledge them. We want to put them on the table and say, boom, look at this. This is what we've got. This is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
This is it.
Just because we don't know the answer
Welcome to the Thunderdome.
Just because we don't know the answer doesn't mean the answer doesn't exist.
Mm.
Doesn't mean that the answer's not out there. Doesn't mean that somebody somewhere doesn't know the answer. But we're willing to learn and we're willing to explore it. So, at some point in an episode like this, we kind of just need to jump into it and be like, let's jump right into it.
Let's do it.
So, why does God allow evil, in your opinion, JP?
Well, in my opinion, John, we've spoken a little bit about this in the last episode. This is a continuation from the last episode.
Good point. Thank you for clarifying that.
I think it's important to just re-establish the fact that God doesn't create evil. Or in my opinion, God doesn't, in the sense that evil doesn't flow from his character.
Yeah.
God creates, and when he creates, there's the possibility for evil.
Yeah.
And the abuse of human free will leads to evil. So that's an important preface in my answer, I believe. Why does God why does God allow evil? Then I think there's a few reasons that God allows evil to occur. The first one, I think, very generally, is God allows evil as a part of his judgment. I think that a lot of people think God, because we're in the New Testament and there's a difference between the New and the Old Testament, that there's no such thing as God's judgment anymore on people. That's a stretch. That's a stretch. I think that God still uses evil as judgment. Now, I'm not saying condemnation. There's a difference between condemnation and judgment. I believe that God uses judgment to redirect his people.
Yeah.
And I think that the allowing of evil or allowing of bad things to happen, whether it be moral evil, whether it be natural evil, or storms and calamities like that, is simply to draw people nearer to him.
Yeah.
And statistically, I think we see that. Whenever there's something that happens, the book of Job, I think, is a good example of this, where Job, God's faithful servant, loses everything, and then he draws even closer to God. And the conclusion that Job makes, I think, is the reason why God sometimes allow evil to happen in our lives.
Yeah.
Is to say, well, I've heard of you. I've heard people speaking about this God, but now I've seen him with my own eyes.
Yeah.
So that, I think, is a good reason. There's a lot of theodicies, I think, that people have pondered about through the ages, because this is not a new question.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a question asked and a question attempted to be answered, and this is not a new question, but I think there's a lot of theodicies that make a lot of sense to me personally. Human growth happens in pain, growth happens in times of sorrow. Another theodicy that says, well, you won't really experience the goodness of God if you don't experience the evil in the world. That's things in that nature. I think the big answer for me, or the big the big thing for me in terms of why God allows evil, is it's found in his wisdom. God knows us better than we know ourselves. He knows what we need instead of what we want. And I think a lot of times he allows pain and suffering. Well, now there's a universal concept called delayed gratification.
Yeah.
That says that, well, if you go through a time of suffering now to get the good later, that's just a principle that governs in the world. Psychologists have recognized this in a long time. And I think even here we can see that if we have to go through a time of suffering now in order for us in the future to be better people, or to experience the fullness of God in a unique way, or to grow closer to him, or whatever the case may be, then he would allow temporary evil to happen, I think.
Interesting. Interesting indeed. So I just want to clarify that I'm not 100% sure what the word theodicy means. JB mentioned it just before we started the episode, and I was like, great, nice word, bro. So like, I don't know if you can give just a quick like
A definition.
yeah, if you want to read a dictionary definition, you can, or just so that they know what you're saying.
Essentially,
say
a theodicy, I think is a. I want to put it in my own terms. I want to sound smart. A theodicy, I think, is like a thought experiment to explain why God would allow evil.
Yeah.
You know, so the theodicy of Job, for instance, God allows evil to draw men closer to Him. That's a thought experiment.
Yeah.
It's a theodicy to explain why God would allow evil.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Like you mentioned just now, that this is sort of an age-old question, and people have attempted many approaches to answer the question. Now, I know as far as like being a really good theologian goes, most of the world's greatest theologians are well versed in what the world's previous greatest theologians had discussed and deliberated. I'm not that guy. I don't know the debate that happened in the 1200s between some dude in sandals and another guy in socks. Yeah, like I don't know that stuff. So the reality is that a lot of what we say even today might have been discussed and debunked, because that's often what I find happening when I like watch a YouTube video or whatever. Is you'll see somebody give an argument, and then you go to the comments and like somebody's like, "Oh, this was debunked in the 1400s, bro." Like this guy had a debate with this guy and like sort of brought an end to that conversation. And so I realized that, you know, that kind of thing happens, and in order for us to really contribute valuably to the conversation, we would have to sort of bring something new if we were trying to contribute a theological value. But I think for us, the value of this is to contribute more as a social value for our listeners, to say, well, how would you engage with this thought, and how would you how would you wrestle with it? How would you stay steadfast in your faith whilst being challenged with something like this, for instance? And I think that's somewhat the value of these conversations we have, is we give people a little bit of something to chew on in a safe environment. I say safe, I mean, it's the internet. How safe can it be? But yeah, we let people sort of chew on something. And so I wanted to add that preface in, because I'm about to say some stuff. And the stuff is interesting. At least for me.
Oh dear.
Oh dear. So if I had to give like my view on why does God allow evil to happen, my first answer would probably be because He loves us. And like immediately peeps gonna be like, how does that make any sense? I mean, like, evil's bad for us, and yet God loves us. Surely He should eradicate evil. And I would suggest that the cross is that for you, for an individual. It's not universal in the sense of it didn't do it universally for all men at the same time.
Yeah.
It is universal in that it's for everyone, but it's an individual gift that one receives. I've got a sneeze coming.
I've got an interesting thought.
Give me your thought.
But I don't know if it's going to interrupt your thought.
I mean, who knows? The sneeze is real, man. It's real.
The sneeze is real. Merch idea. Not the struggle. It's real, the sneeze. No, but my interesting thought while you were talking is literally just the question reversed, you know, is why does God allow good to happen to us?
Absolutely.
Which sounds like a weird question, but if you take into account the complete evil that's in our hearts. You know, if you take into account the nature of man, whether you believe in God or not, you have to acknowledge the fact that man is deprived in his nature. If there is a God who is righteous and holy and who has created people with free will, if you're not a Calvinist watching this or listening to this, if you believe that man has free will and that man is deprived in his nature, then the question becomes, well, why does God allow anything good to happen to us at all?
Yeah.
You know, if his righteousness and his just nature dictates that he should eradicate evil, why doesn't he just eradicate us?
Yeah. That's a good point. It's actually interesting because all these terms that we're using, it's so interesting how we've assigned values to these terms. Like, we've assigned a certain value to the word good, and a certain value to the word love, and a certain value to the word evil, where we've got this definite standard on what is good and what is evil. When I say a definite standard, I'm not saying we all agree exactly this is evil, this is good. But what I mean is we've got this very clear, definite standard that good is more valuable than evil, which is an interesting thing because it actually, if you really wanted to be consistent in like a sort of nihilistic worldview where, you know, nothing sort of matters, then it's irrelevant. Good and evil, their value is irrelevant. And evil isn't bad and good isn't good. It's all just there.
Yeah.
It exists. It is. And the fact that it is even somewhat irrelevant. It's very nihilistic. But the reason why I bring it up is it's interesting that almost universally, if somebody asks that question, they're assigning a value to the word evil and a value to the word good, which immediately shifts them from that very nihilistic view, which says nothing matters, it's all equal, it just is. And it categorizes them into a worldview that says evil is bad, good is good. Where did we get that from?
Yeah, that's a good point.
You know what I'm saying?
It's and a good way to kind of point this out is just to ask the question, well, is there such a thing as a moral law then?
Yeah.
You know, because if you are assigning value to evil and value to good, that has to be a very objective standard.
Yeah.
It can't be a subjective, because then all I can do is, well, what I do is good then.
Yeah.
You know, there's a subjective way.
Well, effectively, that's the thing, you know. It's like somebody could ask you, why does God allow evil? And then your rebuttal could be, why is evil bad?
Yeah.
Like what makes that so bad?
What makes it so bad?
Okay, so let's say God does allow evil. What makes it bad?
Yeah.
In your view. But unfortunately, there's a very big movement in the world today that would believe in evil before they believed in good. They believe evil exists, but they don't believe good exists, which is it's an interesting position. But there's a lot of people who they wouldn't say it that way, but the way they live and the way they actually view the world is that evil is very, very real and good is not so real. Like, they don't think that anything that happens is truly good and truly valuable. Again, very pessimistic worldview. Yeah.
I don't know how you get to that conclusion. Anyway.
Well, the thing is that all, it's things that are birthed over years and years and years of bad worldview, being passed on from generation to generation. But effectively, if somebody asks the question, why does God allow evil? And you then begin to enter this conversation with them about, okay, well, let's talk about good and why does God allow good things to happen? Suddenly we start getting to a point where if we had to accept the fact that there's good, let me say it this way. For a lot of people to accept that there's good in the world would automatically assume or would classify them in a place that says they have to accept that there's a God.
Yeah.
And they don't want to accept that. And so what they rather do is ignore the fact that there's good.
Yeah, well, if they accept evil, it puts them in
No, it kind of does, for sure.
exactly the same.
It kind of does. But the point remains. I mean, there's definitely people out there who would swear by the fact that the world is evil,
Yeah.
and they would not swear by the fact that there's good in it.
Well,
It's just the way it is. I mean, regardless of
that's-
how consistent it is or not,
yeah.
it's a reality.
But how do you go? This is my question. How do you go on to speak to these people?
Yeah,
Because like it's such a convenient worldview.
absolutely.
It's such a like. Well, first of all, the question wouldn't make sense if it came from someone who would believe this.
Yeah,
Because they're like, why would God allow evil? Well, what else could He allow if there's no such thing as good?
yeah.
You know,
But again,
neutrality.
a lot of people who ask such questions are asking these questions with the basis of trying to disprove the fact that God exists in the
Yes.
first place.
Yeah.
So their starting point is God doesn't exist. When they ask the question, why does God allow evil to exist? They're actually creating a conflict in themselves.
Yeah.
Well, you get two groups of people. You get that group of people who says, well, God doesn't actually exist, and I'm going to pose the question to you to try and convince you of that fact by using the fact that there's lots of evil in the world.
Yeah.
So they already don't believe God exists.
Yeah,
they
for
believe
sure.
that evil exists, though, for sure.
For sure. But
So-
but that's the conflict.
Yeah,
Because because it brings it back. It's like, why is if you imply that there's evil, you imply that there's a moral law, and then
Yeah.
you imply that the moral law, because morality has to be objective for it to be morality. Otherwise, it wouldn't be morality.
yeah.
If it's subjective, well then Hitler
Yeah.
did nothing wrong. But it is objective, and everyone accepts this objective moral law, and everyone accepts that what Hitler did was evil.
Yeah.
Well, now we're back to the problem.
Yeah. Which, I mean, I created I created this conversation we just had, to be fair. And it kind of went a little bit off topic because we sort of more started talking about, like, is there a moral law? Which is entirely where I took it. But ultimately, there's a reason why I kind of took that roundabout route in a sense. And it was mainly a follow-up to your conversation. But also, what I wanted to bring the conversation to the place, which basically says, okay, well, effectively, the moment we ask the question, why does God allow evil? We approach it then from a place of God exists and is real. There are people who feel otherwise, who would pose the question.
Sure.
But I'm going to approach it from there. I'm going to approach it from saying, well, let's assume that when you ask the question, you believe that God exists. You believe that He's there and He's doing what He's doing. I don't know what your worldview is in that regard, but you definitely believe that He exists. That's why you ask the question, because you believe there's good.
Yeah.
You believe there's evil.
Yeah.
And they come from somewhere.
Yeah.
There's some sort of standard. And the fact that you've asked the question, why does God allow?
Yeah.
You're putting God into the question.
Yeah. The parrot. Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I'm gonna move on with that as my foundation. That's kind of actually a really roundabout way of getting to that point. But yeah, we kind of went on a bit of a tangent. It is what it is.
It is what it is.
But anyway, so where I actually wanted to go before my sneeze happened.
Did you sneeze?
I didn't sneeze. No,
You never sneezed.
I never sneezed, man. I've got self-control.
Sure.
I'm kidding. So this God, my answer to the question, why does God allow evil, was because He loves us. And this God who loves us allows evil, right? Hear me out. This is where I want to come from. it's a bit weird. So you're going to have to follow for a moment. This is not Calvinistic. I want to be clear about that. And I don't want to be clear about that for any other reason other than I am not a Calvinist. If you are, that's okay. You're welcome to be. But I'm not. And this is not...
You're entitled to your choices.
Yeah. This is not a view that's inspired by me being a Calvinist, is what I want to say. But I believe that there's a sense of when God created. So we call God a creator God. I think we've spoken about this somewhere along the line on one of our episodes. Or I've spoken about it. I don't believe that God is a creator God because he created. I believe that God created because he is a creator God. And it is an important distinction for me. Some people, when I say that, they're like, "What? Why? Why are you saying this?" But for me, it's an important distinction because God created because it's who he is.
Yes.
He can't not create.
Yes.
Because it's in his character. Just like he is righteous, he is holy, he is creator.
Yes.
And so I believe that what happened is, and this is going to sound a little bit mystical and abstract, but follow me for a moment. It's like God was chilling, right? Genesis 1. In the beginning was God. He was chilling by himself, all alone, there. And it's like he had this dream, this imagination of creating a universe and a world with people on it. And these people had free will, and people could rebel against him. It's almost like, just in a moment, I always just think of this, like God had an imagination. Follow me. And in that imagination, he knew a few of the people on that planet. And we know this because the Bible tells us before he laid the foundations of the earth, you know. Now, that's where I come from. Like, this isn't particularly a Calvinistic view because I don't necessarily believe that those verses are universal. I don't know if that verse can be applied to me. I'm not too sure about that. Did God know me before he laid the foundations of the earth? Well, the Bible didn't say that to me. It said it to, for instance, Jeremiah or David. I know those two guys, there was some stuff forming in the mother's womb and like these sort of verses. But anyway, the point is, it was like God in his foreknowledge. There's a verse that speaks about his foreknowledge, and it's also got the word predestined in there. Cool. I get you, Calvinists, but I'm not here to talk about whether I'm a Calvinist or not. It speaks about his foreknowledge. He knew before he laid the foundations what the result was going to be, at least to some extent. And I believe, let's just say there was one person, just one person, that God foreknew in all of creation. Or let's say it was all of them, regardless of whether you're a Calvinist in this view or not. I believe that as God saw that play out in his imagination, quote unquote,
he call it foreknowledge.
Loved those people and laid the foundations of the earth knowingly, fully aware of what the potential of that creation was, fully aware of the evil and the sin that would ensue from that creation, but was compelled to create by two things. The first, that he is a creator. The second is that he loved the people whom he foreknew in his incredible infinite wisdom. Now, I know that sounds a little bit weird and it sounds somewhat mystical, but effectively what I'm suggesting, God could have scrapped that idea in his brain. He could have been like, you know what? I'm not going to do that option. I'm going to do another option. I'm going to create differently. I'm not going to create an Adam and an Eve in a garden. I'm going to create a Frikkie and a Teresa in a submarine. I don't know. Who knows?
Okay.
He could have done it differently, but there was something that compelled him to do it the way he did it. He knew very, very well that mankind was going to rebel against him, and yet for some reason continued to lay the foundations of the earth and to create all that was created. And I believe one of the things that compelled him to do that was love. His love for Adam and Eve. Let's just start there. He imagined this creation with Adam and Eve, and he loved Adam and Eve. And so he created them so that he could love them. Because he is a loving God. It's part of his character. He loves. We don't call him a loving God because he loves. He loves because he's a loving God. Once again, an important distinction for me personally. It's my thing. And so I think there's an element of that comes into play here when we ask, why does God allow evil? It's a thing of God knew it was going to happen from the word go, but he was compelled by his love for mankind to go ahead with the plan anyway. If you see what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I know it's got like a million holes in it. Like there's somebody on the other side of the planet right now that can fire holes in this argument with a freaking submachine gun. I don't know. But like, I get it. But that for me, I think there's something in there. You know, this incredible love God has for his creation. And what kinds of wrongdoings would love suffer through, if I can put it that way. You know, I knew before I married my wife that we would fight about certain things. We would disagree on certain things. I knew that very, very well. It was made clear to us by other people and by ourselves. When we get married, it's not all going to be sunshine and roses. I went ahead with it anyway. I was like, I'm going to marry this woman anyway. Why? Because I love her. I'm going to push through the suffering of the pain and the fighting and the disagreements. I'm going to push through it. My motivation, love. And I think in the same way, there's something of that from God to man.
Yeah.
Very long, drawn-out explanation of something that's very weird to explain.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I did a decent enough job.
Well, that was a theodicy that you just explained.
Wow.
Look at that.
Look at that.
Yeah. I think the question, there's a follow-up question to this question, because when you ask the question, why does God allow evil, there's a lot of hidden implications in it.
Absolutely.
One of the implications is a loving, all-knowing, all-powerful God wouldn't allow evil. That's an underlying implication of whoever's asking this question. But the question that I sometimes ask back is it possible for God to have any morally justifiable reason to allow evil temporarily to flourish?
Sure.
Because if there's a possibility, I don't even have to go into the details of what these possible morally justifiable reasons are. I can just ask the question of the possible. Is it possible? Is it possible that God has morally justifiable reasons to allow certain evil things to happen?
Sure.
If you say no, you'd have to show why.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's going to be very difficult to show why.
Exactly.
If you don't believe in the God of the Bible.
If you don't believe, yeah, that's the thing. But if it is at all possible for God to have morally justifiable reasons to allow evil, then the question becomes irrelevant.
Yeah, sure. That's interesting. There's another underlying implication of the question that I just thought of while you were talking about it. Why does God allow evil? The underlying implication is that he can disallow evil, which is just I don't know what to make of it, but by implication, what the person who's asking the question is saying is, why doesn't he disallow evil? And I think effectively that would come down to the fact that if he had to disallow evil, he would have to disallow human free will entirely.
That's the thing.
Like immediately, with immediate effect.
Yeah.
He would have to disallow free will. There is no universe or anything in which evil and human free will don't coexist, if that makes sense. Like, they have to coexist with one another. Evil will not exist where there is no free will. Free will not exist without evil. It's somewhat of a causation thing, I would say. Like, free will causes evil.
I would agree with that.
It's causation, not correlation.
Yeah.
It's literally a cause. So if you take the result away,
you take the cause
you
away.
have to take the cause away, because you can't leave the cause but take the result. What kind of justifiable action is that?
Yeah.
No, you can do whatever you want to do. You can make the biggest mess you like, but the consequences will never be bad.
That's a good that is a good point. And it comes back to the question, because it's essentially the same question, but I've heard this question a lot also, is why did God put the tree in the garden that they weren't allowed to eat of if he knew that they were going to eat of it?
Yeah.
So like he put the tree in the garden knowing that they were going to eat of it, but he put it there anyway. Why didn't he just plant it like on the other side of the earth or something like that?
Yeah.
And I always argued exactly what you said, is it's to allow the possibility of love.
Yeah.
Because love is how God determines it. We can't say true love is this or true love is that. God can say true love is this or true love is that, because love flows from his character, because God is love. And so however he determines what love is in human context, at least, that is what true love is. And I believe that true love is exactly that. You can't have true love without free will.
Yeah.
You can't have free will without evil.
Sure.
Or the potential of evil. Ergo, you can't have true love without the possibility of evil.
Quick break from today's episode. We would love to take this moment to thank you for watching this episode thus far. There's still more to come, so hang in there. But we just wanted to remind you that we are on all the social media platforms that matter: Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Go follow us there, leave comments down below, do all the things. Get in touch with us, because it's the community that matters.
Yes, and the best way to support us is not necessarily buying the merch, although we do encourage you to do that. It is to share this episode with your friends and your family. And every single other episode that we've ever recorded, go there, hit the share button, share it with your friends and the family. And now the next part of the episode that John alluded to just now.
So, yeah, I think effectively what you were, or part of what you were talking about there, is it comes back to the value of those words that we spoke about a little bit earlier. We've assigned these values and these meanings to certain words, and we consider them valuable. But like you're saying, actually God gets to set that standard. And effectively, I think that's one of the reasons why this is such a difficult conversation to have, because God should be the one to establish those standards. And I almost want to say he didn't, but I mean he did in scripture 100%. But like, it's almost as if he's, well, in fact, there was another thing we spoke about, I think, in one of our episodes, Who Wrote the Bible, it might have been, about the lack of human language, the incapability of human language. Like, human language is only capable of capturing so much truth in it. Can any human language in the world fully describe God? That's sort of the question. Like, can we find any words that completely, utterly describe God? Similarly, could we, are there languages in any or are there words in any human language to describe how big the universe can be? So, like, there's a question without really a definite answer. Like, how big can it be? Well, we don't know. We know how big the visible universe is, etc., and so forth. But like, how big can it be? We don't. Are there words to describe that? Even that size of things, massive, gigantic. These words don't do it justice, because English and other words in other human languages are just incapable. And in the same way, I literally do think that the same thing applies to good and evil. I don't think we truly even grasp the nature of good and the nature of evil in their fullness. I don't think we can describe them properly. I don't think we fully even know how to talk about these things in our own human languages. I think we've made great headway thanks to some of the philosophers of old and people who have really sat down and wrestled with these things over years and years and years. I think we've made great headway. But I think we lack a really, really solid understanding of how these things apply and have solid explanations in human language as to how and why they exist in the first place. You know?
Yeah, I think, well, let's take the example of the universe. You know, how big can it be? You use the word gigantic, massive. The problem is we use those words for much, much smaller things.
Absolutely.
Like relatively big, like an elephant is massive for me.
Yeah.
But in the scope of the universe, it's nothing.
Yeah.
And the exact same thing happens with God. There's that
no
sneeze,
self-control.
Right? That sneeze. But the exact same thing happens with regards to God. We have these words to describe him. Good.
Yeah.
It's the same word we describe
a cup of coffee.
A cup of coffee. Yeah. It's the same word that we describe insignificant things.
Yeah.
And then what happens in our brains, I think we try to equate these things. You know? And I believe, you know, in creation, it's there as a design, you know. It's designed that way.
Yeah.
So as to say, well, if there's something that's good, but something that's better, it points to something that's like the archetype of good. And the archetype of good has to be God, because nothing is above God.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So yes, human language is very incapable of describing this archetype that we all searching for, to see what is the epitome of goodness. But I think that even in language, it still points towards there's something. There is something there.
Yeah.
I don't know why I made this point. It has nothing to do with the conversation. It's just a thought I had.
No, it's cool though. There's a book called In Search of Certainty written by, I think, Josh McDowell or something like that. It's one of the very few books that I've actually read. I don't read often. I read the Bible quite a bit. But outside of that, I'm a terrible reader. But in this book, they also talk a little bit about exactly what you're saying, this idea of we keep pursuing a beautiful rose, but when we find a beautiful rose, it doesn't satisfy our desire to see a beautiful rose. We know this by the fact that we need to see another one in 3 months' time. We keep pursuing the best meal, but the best meal never satisfies our desire for the best meal. We keep pursuing the best relationship, but that relationship doesn't satisfy our desire for the relationship. It's not like we can have it for a week and then never have it. We need constantly, you know.
Yeah.
There's always within us, there's this knowing of there's better. It's just so built into us. And I think absolutely the same thing applies to good and also evil, you know.
Sure.
If we could get some sort of satisfaction through a good work, you know, I did a good thing, I never have to do a good thing ever again.
Yeah.
You know, then that would be the epitome of a good thing. But what is that thing? Somebody tell me. Somebody leave it in the comments. What is that one thing I need to do to never feel that urge ever again to do a good thing? And the reality is that we don't know. We don't have that fullness of the experience of what is good.
Yeah.
We're getting just a type, like you say, an archetype.
Yeah.
There's a scripture in Corinthians.
There's a few scriptures in Corinthians, bro.
There's only one.
There's two.
It's just
Two books of Corinthians. It's
but most of you will probably know the verse I'm busy looking for at the moment. So I apologize.
Can you tell us what the verse is?
Here we go. Here it is here. End of verse chapter 13. Are you guys ready for it? Are you ready for it?
We're waiting.
Oh, no, it's not. Yeah, there we go. For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know even as also I am known.
Yeah.
There's another verse as well somewhere that uses very similar language, but it's basically like we only know in part at the moment, but there will come a day when we know in full. But also I'm busy with this chapter or with this book, 1 Corinthians. I'm doing a study on it at the moment, and that verse is very interesting in context of the whole book. Just if you're wondering, if anybody wants to do a study,
Yeah, no,
it's
interesting, and that's the thing is I believe that when the Bible says that we will fully know, I don't think it means that we will fully know God. I think it's impossible for us to absolutely 100% fully know God. I think we'll spend an eternity knowing God, getting to know God. I think that's what our inheritance is getting the privilege of getting to know our Creator forever. Well, this is a different conversation, but
that's very interesting.
It's very interesting, but I believe that God is the fulfillment of the desires that we have. And like this is a mainstream Christian thought. It's not something akin to me.
Yeah.
But like I believe that God is the fulfillment of what is good.
Yeah.
Like when I drink a good cup of coffee, He is the fulfillment of what makes the cup of coffee good.
Yeah.
You know, He is, and it sounds weird saying that, but if we say that there are types of good things in the world, it's pointing towards this archetype of what good is, the epitome of goodness. I think that Christians would agree with me generally, saying that God is the fulfillment of that.
Yeah. Here's a thought. Creation points to the Creator. Correct.
Yes, I would say so.
You are saying now that God is the epitome of good. He is, everything is pointing towards Him. The desires of our hearts is pointing to Him. Could God, hypothetical question here, could God create something that takes His place as that good thing? Because you see, if God was to create something that was so good that we could be satisfied by it, then we would worship that thing. We would no longer worship God. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So effectively, God would then have created something that doesn't point to Him, points to itself entirely. It's like, there it is what it is. I'm spitballing here. And the reason why I ask this question is, if God couldn't create that thing that is so good that it satisfies our need or our desire for good, then what is effectively my question is this: what is the thing that makes that not as good as God is? What is the imperfection in that thing that makes it not as good as God?
I would say that it's the fact that it's created.
It's created, but now the fact that it's not as good as God means there's got to be something in it that isn't good.
I'm not following.
So our question is, why does God allow evil?
Yes.
Right? If God created something that had no evil in it, it would be completely good, would it not then satisfy our desire for good?
No, I don't think so. And I think that, again, it comes down to the language barriers. What do you mean by good?
For sure.
I think that I think perfection is good. God is perfect.
Yeah.
Anything that's created, by definition, can't be perfect because it's created.
Yeah.
Therefore, whatever God creates, although there's resemblance of good in it, which points back to the Creator, it would never fulfill the place of God because it's created. Therefore, it is not as good as God.
Absolutely. Now, I'm effectively agreeing with you, but what I'm arguing is, if God did create something that was perfectly good, okay, but I'm saying hypothetically, he created something that's perfect and good and would satisfy your need for good, your desire for good, there would be no evil in that thing. There would not be able to be any evil in it.
Hypothetically,
there
sure.
would not be able to be any imperfection in it.
Sure.
Because it would effectively have to take the place of God.
Okay. I'm following.
So ultimately what I'm suggesting is that in order for God to create something that had no evil in it, he would effectively have to create himself.
Yeah.
You know, because by definition, as you so nicely explained now, the creation itself cannot be all good.
Yeah.
It can't sit in that space of being perfect goodness. And if we suggest that God should disallow evil, then what happens to creation is it becomes perfectly good. And then it takes the place of God as being the perfectly good one. And then it no longer points to him as creator.
It points to itself.
It points to itself.
Yeah. That's a good
Which is problematic.
Yeah. That's
So it's a little bit like it's difficult. I literally just thought of this now as we're talking. So I'm spitballing.
But it makes sense what you're saying. Like it would, yeah. Like hypothetically, if that would even be possible, like that's such a weird, abstract thought.
Absolutely.
But if God did create something that's perfect and good in every sense, well,
it would then satisfy our need for goodness and for perfection. And we would stop there. We would get that, and we would be fulfilled, and we would be satisfied, and we would stop pursuing anything more.
Yeah.
And that pursuit is what leads us to love him.
Yes.
Without that pursuit, there's no more love. If I stop pursuing my wife, what happens? We fall out of love.
Yeah.
Quote unquote.
Yeah.
Terrible language, but you guys get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so effectively the same would be true in that everything points us to God, who is the good one. But the fact that it isn't satisfying us leaves that space for the imperfection. It has to have an imperfection in it because it cannot satisfy us.
Yeah.
Because if it satisfied us,
then we wouldn't need God.
It would be a false idol.
Yeah.
And God created it.
Yeah.
And God can't create a false idol.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't even be a false idol, technically speaking, because it is perfect.
Yeah.
Like a false idol implies that it's imperfect.
Yeah, it's a weird thing to rack your brain. But exactly, yeah.
But that's the thing. And ultimately,
we would then fall in love with the creation instead of the creator.
Yeah.
You know, interesting thought. Yeah.
That's a very interesting thought. I'm going to wrestle with that for a while.
So, guys, thanks for listening to this podcast. Maybe we said we weren't going to give people a definitive answer, but maybe we just did. Who knows?
No, but I don't think we.
No,
did,
I don't think so either. I just think it's an interesting.
It's a
thought,
very interesting. It's a theodicy.
It's a theodicy, indeed.
Oh yes, a couple of philosophers philosophizing,
theodicizers. But anyway, there's probably some really clever guy. Actually, we always think there's these people watching. But I think there's like maybe 3 people who actually watch, and like they're probably pretty normal folks. There's probably some guy who's really clever, although
who's got better things to do than watch us for an hour.
Yeah, but I must say some of our viewers are clever.
Oh, for sure.
Like I know Didi's sitting there at the moment, and he's thinking, "Oh, guys, come on, man!
It's so simple.
It's so simple." Just kidding, but. But there's probably somebody who's like, this argument has been made in 1726 at the Council of Zoltan. Anyway, and this is the problem. I don't know, man.
The merchants of Zoltan, thank thee.
I just had the thought while we were having this conversation. I think it's very interesting.
That's an interesting thought.
Very interesting. So everybody, thank you for listening to this episode. It's been real. We hope that you take some value from it and that it helps you wrestle with your own questions and be confident to not always know the answers, but yet hold to what you believe in. For some reason, we think we need to know everything to believe in something, but nobody knows anything. Go listen to episode 1. If you think you know everything, you're dumb.
You stupid.
Oh, I'm so sorry for what he said. Not what I said, what he said.
I'm not sorry. I refuse to apologize at all. I will never apologize. Ever. Ever. Unless I'm wrong. And I'm never wrong. Thank you so much for watching that very fascinating episode about that very fascinating topic. We would like to remind you that we've got other fascinating episodes and other fascinating topics on our fascinating website.
Fascinating indeed, JB. We're also on the following social media networks: Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube.
Wow, and we would love it if you would go there right now and comment on any one of them or all 3 of them, if you please.
That would be great. You're amazing. Don't you ever forget that.